Finally 18, which means the police can probably arrest me for more severe things now. Might be industry standard in Westminster circles, however, as a Christian, you have to move away from that. I think abortion's far more controversial. Yeah, so I'll tell you who I would deport, and obviously from there you can make your mind up if I wouldn't. If migration's at a level where it can risk the religion of a country, it needs to be reversed. If it risks the culture of a country, it needs to be reversed. I think that's pretty cowardly. I do think that a lot of people on the right do move to like America. I hate this sort of idea in politics that a lot of right-wingers do. It's like, we'll just rely on America. You know, we'll suck up to America and say how bad the UK is from there. It's a terrible grift. I think if you're a nationalist, truly, you should be proud of your country.
So, young Bob, hi.
Yeah, I don't know how to introduce myself, but thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. So thanks for coming on. So I'm looking forward to talking to you today about your story, faith, and your activism, which is what you're mainly known for. But first of all, so belated happy birthday. So yeah, now 18.
Finally 18, which means the police can probably arrest me for more severe things now. But you know, it's fantastic. It actually gives me more opportunities because a lot of people, even Bob, who I'm named after, was heavily skeptical at the time, a 16-year-old getting on the scene. So finally being 18 sort of legitimizes me in some way.
So what does, you've mentioned there that something kind of changed. So what legal implications does that have with you now being 18 and not a minor?
Yeah, so over the course of my activism and to a degree my ministry, I was like kicked out of Speaker's Corner from the police. The rules surrounding arresting a juvenile is different from the rules surrounding arresting an adult. So when you're arrested as a juvenile, you have to have an appropriate adult with you, which in some cases actually benefited me. So for example, when I was doing some journalism at the Aston Villa game, I was arrested, and because they couldn't find an appropriate adult in Birmingham, they sort of NFA'd it because the resources needed for my arrest and successful charge would have been too high, considering the crime was just me allegedly breaching the peace. So it is more easier for the police to arrest me, and also a few other things as well that might pop up if I continue doing this down the road.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting, and how that's changed for you. So, what are your thoughts on that then overall? Are you like worried about that? Are you more like animated to do things, or yeah, how do you feel about that?
Well, when it comes to, so typically what comes with the job, so to speak, is the arrests, threats to life, threats to violence, and also threats to your family. Because if you have a second name, Facebook especially, you know, people can look it up, look into your family, and from there it sort of cross-contaminates your brand. So what you are associated as an individual is now associated to your wider family. Now, for many people in the activism scene, that's included a lot of family members losing jobs, losing friends. I haven't seen that personally. However, every so often I am worried with that association, hence why a lot of people, especially at Speaker's Corner, like to have their name, you know, anonymity. However, in politics, it's a bit different. You know, journalism is a huge thing in political activism. Journalists are more on your back to actually get your name, so it will come out at one point or the other. However, if we compare that to religious activism at Speaker's Corner with Bob being able to keep his name, it's because the only people on his back are Muslims, and they're notoriously not good at investigative journalism, hence why they're still in Islam.
Okay. Thanks for sharing. So before we get into some of the meat of the interview, can you tell us, how did you get to this position in the first place? Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your journey into the Christian faith?
Yeah, so I was cradily baptized into the Catholic faith. I think that's a sort of standard for, because my family is Scottish, a Scottish household, born in England, and grew up in a relatively working class family. Primary, secondary school, pretty industry standard stuff. However, I was more into drama, went into like theatre productions, and I was always like socially conservative from my upbringing, especially from my father. So when I engaged in these sort of like degenerate circles, a lot of these like theatre production companies, especially, a lot of them are from the LGBTQ plus community. A lot of them believe in, you know, sort of progressive left-wing values. And whenever I interacted with those values, first of all, the censorship was quite heavy, so I was ostracized a lot. I think it was when Rishi Sunak made comments about transgenderism and I was being apologetical, just simply trying to defend why I believe there's only two biological sexes and genders. they shunned me out just because I had right-wing views. And considering drama is like considered one of those fields where you can be anyone and everyone will accept you, I saw this paradox of tolerance, right? You had these allegedly tolerant people being extremely intolerant of people that they disagree with. So when I sort of fell out with doing drama because I felt uncomfortable being around people who were intolerant of the views that I had, I was sort of lukewarm in my Christianity at that point. Every so often attending a Catholic service here and there, but I didn't want to say believe, always believed in the Christian God. However, I didn't genuinely have faith. So coming into the summer in between year 11 and college, for the American audience, that's like, the last 2 years of like high school into university, I started going on like online chats, trying to find and pick up a new hobby. So found several new video game communities, started engaging with that, had friends there. And then for whatever reason, I have literally no reason why, I just randomly stumbled across like TikTok live spaces and I started debating on religion there. And I found a few friends and they were Orthodox. So they were talking to me about Eastern Orthodoxy. And it was at the point where I was really exploring different religions. So I was even going to like different temples and mosques, not because I believed and were tempted to convert, but I was just interested to see what it looked like. Because I had weeks and weeks and weeks after GCSEs in between college. You have like, I think 8 weeks or something ridiculous like
Long
that.
time.
Yeah, so there's a long time to explore. But I was consistently keep on going to like Catholic services. And it was when my Eastern Orthodox friends on the internet were telling me about Eastern Orthodoxy, where I found a parish, went there, got catechized, baptized. And that was really when I started going to Speaker's Corner, I think a few weeks after regularly attending Eastern Orthodox masses, because whenever I was at home, I was watching like people from Bob the Speaker's Corner, just watching their videos, and I thought it was really cool. I had no idea this existed before that point, and that we had this institution in London where you could just debate people that I used to debate on the internet. Yeah. So I went there and sort of caused some scenes and got a name for myself.
Wow, thanks for sharing. That's a real journey. And how does your Christian faith shape what you do now in terms of your activism? So you're probably most well known for doing your street conversations and debates. How does your faith influence all of that when you're speaking to people who are Christians, who are non-Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and all the rest of it?
Oh, well, so there's a certain grace and reverence, I would say, that one has to attempt to give to people when you're Christian, because there's always this potential that you scandalize the Christian faith more widely, right? A lot of people, especially in America, for example, apostate from the Christian religion because they don't like this idea of Christians being married to a certain version of Republican right-wing politics. So you have to be very careful to have grace and reverence, and also, don't put the Christian faith into disrepute. That being said, another area which surprisingly you would find your Christian faith certainly being influenced by politics, I would say, is in a lot of political circles, this be for the left and the right, there's a lot of hedonism, there's a lack of spirituality there. There's a lot of people who will try to use their profile to get with women, that drink a lot, they do substances and all that stuff. It might be industry standard in Westminster circles. However, as a Christian, you have to move away from that. As much as politics is good, and in some cases it can be quite fun, you don't want to go to hell for your political views. And that's the way that I always give it out to especially more young people who are beginning their journey into politics, or more formal politics, I would say, because they're pressured into doing a lot of this stuff. So I would say, don't commit a sin just for the sake of your career. It's better to have your Christian faith than to have some career in politics, right? So that's another area in which your Christianity wouldn't be influenced by your activism, moving away from hedonism. And that's something large in a lot of political circles.
What is Project Britannia? So that is something which you are behind, which is your brand, your ministry. What is that? What does it stand for? And what was the reason for creating that?
Yeah, so I departed from Turning Point UK, I think just before Christmas or just after. You have to give me about the dates. And the reason why I did that was fundamentally I didn't see that any of the management had a genuine vision, plan, or any interests in youth activism, simply because it's unprofitable, it's unsafe, and it's very difficult to do because no one else has done it in Britain. So I thought, might as well do this by myself. If I don't achieve anything, at least it's on my own back. Actually, recently I've been speaking to some young guys into September, setting up some chapters, which will be interesting. However, it's largely both a political action group for young people and also to help Christians as well. It's going to be slow in the making. Obviously, I'm just one guy, and there's been a lot of things that have stopped me from actually developing anything on that actual brand. However, largely the idea is to get chapters in universities, actually help young people who are right-wing and who are anti-abortion. I'm a massive pro-lifer. And that mostly the reason is because there are a lot of right-wing students, there are a lot of Christian students who are staunchly pro-life. However, it is very difficult to get to them. It's very difficult for them to express their views because they're intimidated. I think one of the youth officers for a pro-life charity was talking to me once about how in Manchester there was a massive riot when a pro-life society tried to set up a little meeting or event or whatever. And from then on, they saw like a staunch decrease in pro-life activism at universities. That's simply because people don't want to get beat up and lose their careers and lose their positions at universities. However, I think the perfect time is now. There's a precedent set by Charlie Kirk. Also, we have a lot of the Free Speech Union, Christian Concern, all these other organisations that can help young people if they're ever in trouble. So I think that there's more resources now on the right than there was, say, 10, 20 years ago to go out to universities and actually preach your ideas, debate with them, also set up some infrastructure there.
So would you say one of the weaknesses of the more right-wing conservative movement is the organisation of people? You've said there that there's these people who are, pro-life and all this kind of thing, but they've not got a group or a place to meet. Whereas more left-leaning people would have more groups, would you say? Or, what's the difference?
So the way that the sort of left transmits itself... I'll ask you this question. Do you know a left-wing version of Young Bob?
I guess so. Actually, no, not in terms of, ideas. There's, obviously, economics and this kind of thing, I suppose, but not in terms
Actual
of...
people.
Not really, no.
Do you know a left-wing version of Tommy Robinson?
Outside of politicians, lots of politicians, but not in terms of a grassroots person.
I wouldn't say Bob's more of a Christian, but a sort of left-wing alternative to what Bob does.
No.
But the point being is that the way the right is popular or has influence is through independent content creators and podcasters. The way that the left has is through institutions, unions, and big grassroots organizations. They don't have any particular spokespersons or big people there. I don't think there is a spokesperson for stand up to racism or Antifa. But because of that fundamental difference on methodology, it means that it's more difficult for the right to organize, in particular universities. And I always give this example. Because of the identity politics on the left, you'll have all of these will be left-wing societies. What I say does not actually reflect what they generally represent, but you'll have say if you're an African-American lesbian, right, who's a Marxist, you have a Marxist society, you have an African-American society, and you have an LGBTQ plus society. All of them broadly believe in the same things. However, they have a different membership base and they all work together when, for example, the right-wingers on campus and they counter-protest them. The right has one society, it's a conservative society. They are largely centrists. They don't really care to be controversial at all, which means it's very difficult to do anything in universities. Yeah,
so what you're saying is left-leaning people have more institutions, and then the right will have more leaders who are thought leaders.
Yeah, or just podcasters, content creators.
Yeah.
And I think mainly because I think the right, first of all, they don't put politics at the forefront of everything. So right-wingers can be entertaining, they can be funny. Right-wingers can have media without censorship. Meanwhile, the left, everything they do is boring, dull, and the same. So if they have media, it's woke, it's boring because there's no good writing there. They can't have podcasts because they don't allow people to actually speak with their own mind freely. And they don't really have thought leaders because there's no need for them to.
No, I can see what you're saying there. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what's your view on the role of the church in all of this?
I think a lot of times when it comes to politics, the left will use. Let's take, for example, the CIV, right? I think that's a good example. Not a Anglican Christian by any mark. However, it is something that claims to be a church. It is the institution of England. It is the Church of England. I don't think the right wing should sort of hope at the Archbishop of Canterbury and all the archbishops like these right wingers. I think that's pretty unfair. I think it would sort of destroy this idea that Christianity is for everyone. However, I think on an individual level, we should have parishes which effectively cooperate with the communities they live in. So, for example, like pro-life banks, you see that a lot. People giving like diapers, formulas, that sort of stuff to families who want to have children but can't afford it. That reduces the amount of abortions. Priests that host local events at their churches, discussions on stuff like abortion, because it might be a bit controversial and taboo in this country. And also just, a thriving church, because I really think Christianity and spirituality is sort of what fuels the person. And then the person decides to go out and do politics. So I think that's an extra step. Once you have your faith, you can go out and vocationally do other things. However, you need that first step. So you just need a church to function as a church. I wouldn't suggest that we have priests who start running to be MPs. I think that'd be incredibly stupid.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you. And so you describe yourself as a Christian pro-life remigration activist.
Yes.
So can you unpack a little bit of that? And then also I'd like to throw in there, how do you keep being Christian at the front rather than all the rest of it being at the top, if that makes sense?
So everything you have to do has to be baptized within your Christian tradition. So I'll explain why I used each of those words, and I think it's very important, the reason why. So obviously, I think it goes without saying, every Christian's pro-life. We believe that every human is an image bearer of God. In the Bible, throughout the Bible, it says, before you were born, I knew you. God actually knows the pre-existent life that could have been, and we can appreciate that all fetuses in the womb have a future like ours that we shouldn't deprive it of, and we shouldn't murder the innocent, as that is one of the 10 Commandments. Remigration, the reason why I do that, typically remigration is an associated concept with like total remigration. Don't believe in that. However, I think that when it comes to the migration policy of Christians, it's very simple. In order to submit yourself to God, you must submit yourself to the government, governing authority. That's what Paul talks about. So in all cases, we have to submit ourselves to our governments. However, governments, if it's a Christian government, has to understand that the associated welfare of the state is tied to its people. So migration is contextual, right? You can either allow for it if it's edifying for its people, or you have to restrict it if it's no longer edifying for the people. So a Christian country should move towards a system in which you can have controlled levels of migration, where you do have a degree of demographic security. I think that a Christian should have more flack with legal forms of migration compared to like refugees, for example. I think we should be more focused on like persecuted Christians. I think a lot of Christians in politics have that concept reversed. So where they talk about a lot of Christians who do also happen to be right-wing, they'll say, I have issues with illegal migration, where we talk about like people claim asylum, but I'm okay with legal migration. In fact, it should be reversed. A Christian government can control legal migration, but they have to move to a point where they can accept persecuted Christians. So I believe that the current level of migration in this country is unprecedented, didn't have the democratic consent of its people. It's causing large issues with social integration. It's causing large issues with like enclaves no longer communicating with the rest of Britain. And we're also seeing our culture and our religion slowly being eroded by radical sects of Islam. So I really think we need to begin to reverse it. And the reason why I use remigration as a strong term is the Overton window. So it's a concept of what are like the window of socially accepted terms. And you see this with like Enoch Powell, for example, he used the term repatriation. If you use strong language and it becomes acceptable, it means that your position is more easier to give to people. And I'm always like that, especially with like pro-life, by pro-life activism. I use abolition, and we're a country that allows for abortion and potentially legalizes it up until delivery. So if I say abolition, or if we're able to even get abolition into the discussion when it comes to abortion rights, that would be huge in Britain. So I always like using strong language intentionally.
Yeah, so that's the aim you're going for in terms of, you say, being absolutist in what you want, your desire. So would you accept something less than that, but which is closer to that, which as in like a gradation, or going towards it? Or is
So I've been very clear that I believe in a stagnated approach, both on migration policy and also on abortion. So abortion, especially, women are taught from up until their, from their education that abortion is their right. So if you take immediately that right away, there's going to be riots on the street. Now, it's probably more sensible to suggest that, and most people agree with you, even a pro-choicer, okay, would you want to minimize the amount of abortions? Well, yeah, you'd probably want to, right? So if you have a stagnated approach where you simply restrict how long you can have an abortion for, so I'd move towards initially a 12-week ban, and why you can have it. I think that people would think that's far more sensible, and that would initially reduce the amount of abortions. When it comes to migration, I think that small things should be done pretty instantly. So, for example, small boats coming over. It's a humanitarian crisis on both ends, in both the country that accepts undocumented men and also for the people who actually come here via boats. So a lot of them have to pay human smugglers, then have to get involved in crime in order to pay off their debts. So they'll pay like £40,000, then they'll have to start dealing in drugs when they get here. So that's pretty unsafe on them. And then even be boat travel over in the channel. It's incredibly unsafe. I think a few months ago we had 3 children just die drowning when coming over here from Calais to Dover. So it's unsafe for both sides. So definitely that stagnated approach of one step at a time. Because if you do it too quickly, first of all, very difficult to, you'd be setting people's expectations too high. And also it's civil unrest. There are people that do disagree with us as much as we would like to believe everyone agrees with our worldview.
And would you say this is the more contentious topic that you talk about, either remigration or
I think abortion's far more controversial.
Really?
Yeah, it's because it's seen as a sort of cross-pollination project of American politics, when it's not really. So, for example, famously, American Bible Belt politics is like evangelical. I'm not an evangelical Christian. And also, largely, it's just an issue with, my understanding of life, that it starts from conception and that should be valued. So, as much as I want to move away from that accusation, that's people's always going to hold that worldview. It's also, even members of the right don't like me for doing it. So I always like looking at analytics, comment sections, not because it really, I know a lot of people, get hurt when they read comments they don't like. I'm just fascinated.
Okay.
I read it, and whenever I do migration stands, they perform really well analytically. They get a lot of engagement. They get a lot of people viewing it. And that goes for even more tame stuff like transgenderism or whatever. However, when I do abortion, significantly low engagement, significantly low how long people watch these videos, and more hate comments. Because it consists of, I agree with young Bob on most areas. However, I think what he's doing here is wrong.
Okay. So to close up the conversation around migration, so where do you stand in terms of, so for example, I'm sure people, obviously I do as well, in terms of who have got come here and they're integrated and they're credit to themselves and all the rest of it. So are you where do you stand on those kind of people? Let's say the second generation, third generation. And because I think with a lot of these things, I watch a few videos and sometimes people hear you say remigration and then they just basically shout at you about something, but they don't find the nuance or whatever. So just to make it clear for the people watching, where do you stand on people who are integrated and they've been here a while, or the second generation kind of thing, or third, fourth, compared to the people you mentioned in terms of the small boats and this kind of thing?
Yeah, so I'll tell you who I would deport, and obviously from there you can make your mind up of who I wouldn't. And then I'll address your question head on. So I believe in Restore Britain's deportation document, which talks about the deportations of illegal migrants, so visa overstayers and failed asylum seekers. We know, according to the OBS, that's about 1.2 million. And because that's an underreported statistic, you're really looking at 2 million.
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. Then people who are net drains to the economy. So people, especially under the Boris wave, who take in more than they give out. That could even be people who have low-income jobs but receive a lot of subsidies. People who are aware of life. So there are like self-deportation methods like banning halal meat, banning burqa, pushing out this idea of a multi-faith country, being a mono-coat country. A lot of that will have self-deportations. And from there, you're looking at over 10 million people, which the Blairite state have brought in without the consent of its people, and it's also incredibly damaging. And when you talk about the sort of, even when you go far, like fourth generation migrant household, even them, they feel under threat, right? And that's not because of the right. That's not because we have quite harsh rhetoric surrounding migration. I think it's more of the left. If you dilute the quality and pool of migrants and increase its quantity, what inevitably happens is people begin to generalize, right? So this is a fear of the left, that we generalize all migrants. I don't. But that's a consequence of them bringing in too many when it no longer becomes edifying for a nation. So, I think a small quantity of quality migrants is great for a nation, right? Even on a small level, you would want nuclear scientists, you would want theologians, you would want people to come over here and train British people who may not be educated in a particular field, or we may not have enough workers. That's why I believe in high-skilled worker visas. I think Restore Britain as well is the only really pro-marriage license in Britain. So if you're married to a foreigner, I spoke to a lot of people in a similar situation in Makerfield. You're spending thousands of pounds taking these people over, which is unfair if you're a married couple. So we believe in like extraditing their visas and allowing them to come here for quicker and cheaper reasons.
And so can you just answer the point in relation to like people being here for like
I have no problem with
generations?
them. No problem.
Great. So that's basically what I'm trying to flush out, because I think, like you've just mentioned there, one person will hear remigration, but they'll understand that as anybody who's not been here like, generation, thousands of years, or, 1,000 years kind of thing. Like,
I think it's purity. When people focus on that sort of purity spiraling, and also very difficult to impose. So like, I'm not the Gestapo. I'm not going to go like door to door and ask for like blood tests or whatever. That's basically the point I was trying to raise in terms of ancestry and all that kind of thing. Where are you on that then, in terms of like, there's like different forms of like nationalism, and we're hearing about like, civic nationalism, Christian nationalism, ethno nationalism, all these different. So where do you stand on those? I think it's sort of, when you say civic, Christian, and ethno, it sort of elevates one over the rest. And I think that totally understands what a nation is. A nation is a geography, so where the nation's actually constituted. It's a people, so historically the people who have settled the land. It has a religion, so the religion of the people who settled the land. And it also has a culture. Now, some people unequally yoke different concepts of a nation. So one might elevate Christianity over all of them, or one might elevate ethnicity over all of them, and one might elevate culture over all of them. And I think you need to have a perfect balance of all of them, or you have to fairly appreciate all of them when you talk about especially migration, right? So if migration's at a level where it can risk the religion of a country, it needs to be reversed. If it risks the culture of a country, it needs to be reversed. And if it damages the people of the country, it needs to be reversed. Because a nation isn't just a culture, because people actually established the culture. It's not just a religion, because a people established that religion. And it's not just a people, because the people also have a culture and a religion. So I think that these divisions largely stem from the internet, where people want to focus on one over the other. So if you want to focus a lot on your Christianity and not on the rest, or if you just want to focus on culture and not on the rest, or if you don't want to just focus on the people and not on the rest, so I'm just a nationalist. I think that we have to fairly consider everything. We have to consider the religion of this nation, which is Christianity. We have to consider the people, so the our ancestors who made this land and appreciate their legacy, and also the culture.
And I guess that would mean you're pro-British, is that right? Because you're pure. So you're pro-restore Britain. So what does it mean then to be British? Because that encapsulates all of those things, doesn't it? So what does that mean to you?
Well, so when we talk about, especially the divisions, whether it's civic, ethno, and Christian nationalism, so I think there's three ways to sort of define Britishness as an ethnicity. So whether you are an Anglo-Saxon, Celts, Cornish, whatever, the sort of ethnogenesis, the sort of makeup of the people who formed this land. It's a legal term, so whether you have citizenship in this country, and it's also a civic term, so whether you culturally are in line with the people of this country. Now, I accept all three definitions. Right? I have no problem accepting that those three definitions exist and I can apply it to people. However, I think people are having less and less. I think people are less and less being polite about these three different definitions being used simply because of the state of this country. So you hear this a lot with Restore Britain circles, which I sympathise with. Britishness isn't just a passport, right? So they disregard the legal terms, which makes sense, right? Shamima Begum was considered British. I don't think most people would call her British. Even now with like being civically British, a lot of people, again, as we spoke about before, generalising all migrants as the same. People are naturally coming to the conclusion that migration as a whole is no longer edifying towards the nation, so you want to stick to a sort of ancestry/ethnicity-based definition of what it means to be British. But if we were to revert migration back to the sort of, let's say like 1960s, which Rupert Lowe talks about, I'd have no issue using both a civic and ethnically based definition for what it means to be British.
And would you impose the same standard on other countries as well? So, for example, if loads of Brits were to go to a different country and then try to Britanize it, for example.
Yeah, I think that's wrong. And in fact, I would think, like, I think the Japanese, for example, or even a lot of African nations, they have a strong sense of tribalism and also their own people. So they'll be very customary to you. They'll be considered your guests. They'll treat you in an equal way. They'll treat your fellow countrymen. You could never be considered Japanese. And I think a lot of people, when we talk about identity, especially when it comes to a nationality, a lot of these people are disregarding the long-standing pride in their families. So where one might come from Nigeria or Japan and come to Britain and they consider themselves British, that might offend some of their family members at home who would still want them to be considered Nigerian or Japanese. So it's not like when we say to certain people they're not British, that is them being, us being rude. I think that assumes that for whatever reason we're taking all of their identity away from them, because they still have a rich identity and ancestry and history in other countries.
So there could be Nigerian British or something like that, for example.
Yeah, and also as well, as I said to you before, I think a lot of the times on the left, they don't understand that when someone completely disregards their Nigerian identity, that's extremely disrespectful to a lot of Nigerians at home. And I think a lot of people on the left are quite narrow-minded when it comes to that worldview. I think that comes from what they understand as ancestral guilt, that outside of Britain, everyone's like deeply deprived, endangered and poor. But no, there's a rich legacy and culture everywhere you go. The same issues surrounding what is considered British is probably occurring in other countries as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And so thank you for that. I think that probably wraps up most of that. And then in terms of the main contentious point you mentioned in relation to abortion, what do you say to people, men, women, I presume are the main people who are speaking to, women in particular? How would you articulate your point in terms of that? So they'll say to you, I presume, you want to take away my rights or something like that. So what do you say to them in response to that, presuming they're not a Christian, or maybe they are Christians too?
Well, I'd put it easily to them like this. Okay, so first of all, a right is something you need to survive, right? Typically, so like a right, so like a right to shelter, a right to food, a right to warmth, stuff like that. I don't think anyone's going to die in the case of your rights from abortion being stripped away from you. In fact, the reverse happens if we give you those rights. So it's sort of deconstructing their education from where they're born, the sort of language they use. And I think that's why the pro-life movement, especially in America, has been incredibly successful, because, you sort of see this, and it's really cringy, facts over feelings, right? A lot of politics in this country is vibe-based, across the pond as well. So it's not all right.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go to, okay, so they'll say, well, why do you want abortion to be banned anyways? Well, we'll ask them this question. Okay, do you believe all living human beings deserve equality under the law, right? International conventions establish this. Governments will tell you this. New education tells you this as well. You and I, probably at different stages of development, we have different genetics, different hair colors, different eye colors.
Mm-hmm.
However, we are still merited the same. We still have the same human value. And they'll say, obviously, yes, we don't want to discriminate and afford people less rights based on different stuff. Well, then, if a fetus is a living human being, it should surely be given the same level of protection. And then, after we've established all of this, and 99.9% of the time when it comes to abortion discussion, they're not accepting your points. They rather have nothing else to say in response. They still disagree with you. However, they'll just move on to the next point because they're being dishonest. And usually I'd recommend most abortion debaters go along with it. Maybe make a sly comment that they're being terrible at debating. However, you're not trying to spend your energy to change the person's mind who you're speaking to, especially in the cases of a lot of diehard feminists who are very pro-abortion. It's more the people at home you're watching. And this is even true with Muslims at Speaker's Corner. Then they'll move to like extreme situations, incest and rape. Well, I would say to you, first of all, how would you enforce that exception? It'd be very difficult to force a rape-only exception for abortion. Because you couldn't base it on prosecutions, because prosecutions less than 3%. And they couldn't be self-identified, because every woman under the sun would then claim to have been a product of rape. So the most consistent position is to say that regardless of the mode of conception, be it through incest, rape, or consensual sex, we still give that protection for that human life. And even if we were to take for what the person had to say, there's that same degree of protection.
Right. Okay. I think you've been quite clear there. Would you say the main part that's being challenged is whether it's a life or not?
No. I think when you boil it down, I generally think these people are really uneducated. They don't have to have this discussion at all, which is ironic because they claim because I'm so young I'm not able to have this discussion. I think it's just an ignorance combined with a willingness to want to have abortions, which means they're going to be dismissive of your points, which means that in a lot of cases, they're going to move towards completely not listening to what you have to say, whilst also agreeing to basic biology as it is a life. Most smart pro-choicers would then just say that a living human being is not a sufficient condition for moral consideration. So it has to be something else, like consciousness, for example, or rationality, or like being born or whatever. But even then, those arguments are easily dismissible, considering that the fetus will have all these things at a certain stage of development, that you're sort of cutting off at the root. It's like if I cut a tree down when it was growing, right? We could all agree that at some point, if I cut down this oak tree could be this massive thing that we all like, and we value a tree for being. But if we cut it down, you're stopping its development, which is bad. It's like, for example, we speak about purpose and like telos, and it's Aristotelian understanding of what that looks like. If you're baking a cake, right, you have the mixture and it's in the oven, and it's in between the cycles of being just a bit of pastry towards being an actual cake. If I took the oven out, took the cake mixture out and chucked it on the floor, you'd probably be angry. Not because it's a cake mixture, because it's becoming an actual cake.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, sir. I think this brings us nicely to the next part in terms of these points when there's lots of immersion and people are challenging you or pushing back or rejecting what you're saying. That's led to violence in some cases. So you were in Manchester and you were attacked there. That was quite widely seen, mainly online from what I understand. And yeah, people were quite concerned, and then other mixed feelings as well. So how have you like dealt with that in terms of like personally, and what has it meant in terms of going forward as well, in terms of like taking your safety seriously and actually talking to people as well, because that does introduce a different dimension to it, isn't it?
We have to have a security of like 5 people at stands now, which is expensive, difficult, and has also stopped the momentum of doing these stands. In terms of how I deal with it personally, it's not per se myself. I mean, in Manchester, I was very shaken. I was visibly upset. That sort of stops after a few seconds. I think mostly I was just really bummed that all of the equipment either got nicked or broke, which means you have to just start up over again. Or when it comes to political activism, most of it drills down to a financial cost. This is why a lot of the times we're accused of being grifters. But there is, you can't afford just based on social media advertisement, camera equipment, security, and travel costs all the time. So that's mostly my concern. But outside of myself, it's my fiance and family members. I don't tell them about this happens. They see it on the internet, which distresses them a bit, which is not fair on them. But, I'd rather not get hit doing these stunts. I'd rather have genuine discussion. In fact, most people will find that the most engagement does not come from me getting beat up, but rather me actually having discussions with people, and it's far more effective. Now, I would say, best things coming out of bad things. A lot of the times when I'm beat up, it does radicalize quite a few people. A lot of people who stood on the centre ground who sees a young lad beat up just for simply having a small little table about Restore Britain. The kid must have to say something worth knowing if he's getting beat up for it. So that, to a degree, that helps. However, I had to take my safety first, especially with debate stands. A lot of fears, acid attack, maybe people throwing things that they shouldn't. It's a very bad risk.
Yeah, but you do it anyway.
Yeah, because if I don't do it, no one else will. So.
And is that one of the reasons why you started this? Because you're looking out there and you're like, why is nobody talking about this?
So I started debate stands when I was about 16, I think. So I was sort of the first one to bring the sort of debate stand style to Britain. I think at least anyways, there may have been someone in like the 2010s who attempted to do it, but they certainly didn't continue doing it. So I was the first man to bring debate stands to Britain. And really after the death of Charlie Kirk, it brought over a lot of other people doing it, which is good to see, good people contributing to the fight. But it's really going to be interesting to see with the sort of emergence of right-wing politics over the summer, how that converts in September when universities are open, because at the moment we're just doing it in public spaces. We were doing it at universities just before summer break started. However, in the winter, it's going to be great to see how that kicks off, because we've got all these different people now on the right trying to get to young people. I think it's going to weed out sort of weakness, so that people can't be bothered to actually do anything, and it's going to bring forth a lot of intellectual thought leaders for the youth.
Wow, we'll see what happens there. And how do you prepare for all of these things then? So you're out and about quite a lot doing these talks, these discussions, these meeting with people on the street, these change my mind kind of opportunities. How do you prepare for those? Do you just rock up and you've done so much preparation before, or how does that work?
I don't even prepare to when we do like actual debates, like scheduled one-on-one discussions with people at different venues. It's routine. You've created so many pathways in your brain when it comes to this discussion. There's no need to. That's why on the right as well, we focus a lot on the behavior on the left. How their over-reliance on a script or, a piece of paper or their phone or ChatGPT or whatever. Because it's incredibly telling on the person. If they can't recite their own position, they can't recite basic facts, basic talking points on their side against the other, it shows a real lack of intellectualism. But I don't really prepare at all. I should begin to prepare my voice because I'm seeing a few days ago in Oxford, my voice, I had no voice for 2 days straight. It was terrible. But besides from that, no, I don't need any preparation.
And I think the next question naturally would come, particularly if somebody hasn't seen what you do in terms of in the wild. How have you, so you're 18 years old and yet you're confronting adults many times with these ideas. How have you got to this point where you have all of these ideas in your mind and you're able to articulate these particular points of view from a Christian perspective plus a political perspective?
It's not that I'm smart. It's not to be narcissistic. It's just all these university students are generally thick.
Okay.
And the left will even admit this, right? Because they'll try to. They can't accuse me of it so much because, according to everyone on paper, I am younger than a university student I was a few days ago. I am less educated than a university student. I am statistically more poorer than a university student. I come from a poorer household, which means on every single metric of when someone from the left tries to accuse me of just exploiting university students, I should be the person who is ran out intellectually because they should be smarter. But most of these university students, par a few exceptions, because there are some genuinely smart ones, these people are stupid. And it's frightening how stupid these people are. The first university I went to was at the University of Sussex for Turning Point when I was, I think, 15 turning to 16. And I was thinking to myself, we'll speak to some of these university students, and I suspect, because I'm very skeptical of even propaganda on the right, this sort of narrative that students at universities are stupid is probably a myth. Probably actually quite smart. Probably just clipping software somewhere, and they probably actually give a fair debate. The first discussion I had at that campus was from the professor of philosophy at Sussex University, and within 5 minutes he ran away, started calling me a Nazi and a gender dogmatist. That's how mad he got, because he couldn't actually have a full discussion because he's never had one in his life, which was frightening, hilarious, and also quite scary because people are paying for that sort of education. Which also, I think it reflects on their students' mental health as well. I don't think a lot of these university students are equipped mentally and physically for the outside world. I mean, it's all in well that these people are meant to be receiving an education, but whilst they're receiving an education, they're not gaining any practical skills.
And it seems to me that you've been battle tested. So at Speaker's Corner is pretty much like the centre of all of this, isn't it? And then you do it on the streets as well. So whereas people at universities, they're not having that experience out, they're not getting confronted and forced to really think what they think about these things and go deep on it. You're literally out there, and I think that does bring a different level of
I think it
as
brings
well.
So first of all, when people, there's other people, as I said, that do stands. And every so often, some young people come up to me, it's like, what makes you different from anyone else? And I will say, it's healthy competition. It's all good. It should be encouraged. More people fighting, the better. However, what makes me different is from my background in not like high tier debates. A lot of this is quite low tier. A lot of this is pretty casual discussion. However, it's the sort of skills you learn from Speaker's Corner, which is very transferable at universities. First of all, from the non-stop discussion. So if you're having a discussion for 5+ hours, in some cases at these universities, towards the 5 hours, you could be quite irritable. You could have low impulse control. You could stutter. You could look visually fed up. And for a lot of people, that turns them off from a discussion, either at the stand or at home watching it. So that's one of the transferable skills. Another just being really to adaptively think. So at Speaker's Corner, as much as there is a Dower script, sometimes people can give you like an oddball. So responding to that quite quickly is also a skill you get at Speaker's Corner. And I think there's a nice continuity from starting out to Speaker's Corner to almost pocketing Speaker's Corner and, giving it to people across the country. I think there's something poetic in that.
So where do you see the next, what's happening next over the next couple of years, and what's your vision for, say, the next 2, 3, 4 to 5 years in terms of the somewhat short term for Britain, and what needs to happen and how does that look in your view?
So I don't think, contrary to a lot of politicians trying to sell the urgency for them to be elected into power, that come 29, if a right-wing government isn't elected, we're just going to completely collapse. I think that for Western developed countries, you're looking towards a managed decline, right? So over time, more visibly, you're going to see the country erode economically and socially, right? Where high streets were flourishing, now you see a bunch of corner shops, vape shops, tax dodging, antisocial behavior, unemployment, and just a terrible state. But where I see going forward, what is necessary is a sort of cultural and economic revolution. The right needs to sort of be seen as this counter movement. And I do think we need tactical voting on the right when it comes to the Conservatives, Reform and Restore. And the reason why I'd say that is it's virtually now going to be impossible to get not into power without that form of tactical voting. If you look at it, there are still Conservative seats being held because Kemi Badenoch has done a decent job at running the Conservative Party. Reform, I think Reform after this Clacton by-election is probably going to tank in support, needing the Conservatives, and also Restore, because I think Restore, like UKIP before, was something that was good in grounding these parties to the right, actually being an electoral force that pressures these people to be towards the right wing. And in certain areas, we're going to do quite well in, because we have good branches and good local candidates like Rupert Lowe and Great Yarmouth. The support for Rupert and Yarmouth is huge. No one's going to get rid of that, which means that there needs to be more open dialogue across different parties on the right, because we largely want to achieve the same things. I don't trust the Conservatives or Reform. However, if it is between Conservatives, Reform, or alternatively Labour, the Greens, Lib Dems, I'd much more prefer a party that has a closer, approximate view to mine than compared to someone that's far worse. Because if we don't get the right wing sorted come 29 or even the election afterwards, it means that the left wing is going to complete its capturing of the institutions, which means that a lot of the things that I'm speaking up against, be it migration, be it radical Islam, will just be the status quo, which is very dangerous, because once we get into a position where these discussions are literally in some cases going to be illegal, this country is just going to be unrecognizable. It's going to be very difficult for it to recover. And we're probably just going to cascade down into being like a third world country.
And let's just say that was to happen then. What would you do in that? Would you seek to move somewhere, or?
I think that's pretty cowardly. I do think that a lot of people on the right do move to like America. I hate this sort of idea in politics that a lot of right wingers do. It's like, we'll just rely on America. We'll suck up to America and say how bad the UK is from there. It's a terrible grift. I think if you're a nationalist, truly, you should be proud of your country and help it. And even then, I think that the right at the moment, and this may have contradicted my previous statement of this fake sense of urgency, is at a crossroads. And nowhere can this be seen in America with the midterms, potentially going forward in 28, because J.D. Vance is going to find himself incredibly difficult to be re-elected. And you see this in Europe as well. You see the emergence of right-wing authorities and parties. However, we also equally see an opportunity for them to be pulled down and for them to be cast out and not lose elections. And once the right-wing loses these elections, I think it's going to be very easy to disregard their ideology and disregard their influence, and the momentum will die. So it's going to be a crossroads, I think. And I don't think going to America is going to help it, especially considering I think the issues we see in the UK is the issues that we see everywhere in the West.
And what do events such as put Christ back into Christmas, which you write as understand it, and these kind of things have on it? So these aren't necessarily political, these are more like grassroots events and things like that with a Christian leaning. What effects do they have, and how important are those in terms of shaping the nation?
I more made a statement at the Put the Christ Back in Christmas event that churches need to begin to realise that there is a political audience for their churches, and they need to be there and be consistent. If the church should be a non-political organisation, but there needs to be a cooperation between church and state. The church doesn't need to work in the state, doesn't need to become part of the state, but it needs to work with the state. And the same is true with people who are politically active. They need to work with these people. So instead of churches, not attending these events, attend them. And if these people are wrong in what they're doing politically, call it out. But on their platform, whilst also preaching the Christian stuff that we all agree to. I think that people like Toby would probably be more of an open to having a COV, a Catholic or Orthodox priest going out and speaking at their events, speaking to these people privately and saying, here is where we disagree on X, Y, and Z. Here is where we agree. And this is Christ, and this is our gospel, and this is our expression of the Christian faith. And it would bring in more people also as well. I'm the one to first to admit this. A lot of these people, and the left uses this as an attack, I would say this is just simply a problem that we need to resolve. A lot of these people who like Christianity never do anything that's Christian, never go out to church, never attend a mass or a liturgy or whatever, and that needs to change.
And what recommendations do you have for people to get involved? I'm guessing your audience is mainly younger people. So what advice do you have to them, or what would you say to them in terms of what can they do?
Literally, the easiest thing is attending your local parish. It's like, it's simple things like that. So I heard it from an Orthodox father, and it's very true. People, when they think of, okay, I want to change my life, they want to do it dramatically. They want to do it publicly. They want to say to the entire world, look how much of a changed man I am. This is what I'm doing. They want to change the regimen drastically. And I don't think that's how God works. I don't think that's how the church works. And I don't think that's how people work. I think it's very much the social medification of lifestyle advice. So take it slowly, and slowly but surely your life will noticeably change for the better. And you don't even need to tell other people you're doing it. They'll notice it. So if you're more of a Christian, you're more loving, you're more patient, you're more caring, and your parents will notice that. And other people in your life will notice that, and they'll wonder why you are like that, because most people want to be like that, and they'll start imitating that. So become more healthier, subtly, be more of an active person, spend less time on social media, get a more consistent regimen of sleep, go to church, do morning prayers. Then, if you believe or chosen to, do politics. But if you don't have all of those sorted out, they'll come to haunt you later when you aren't doing politics. This is what you see all the time. Okay, I'm a man doing politics, I have thousands of followers. Well, I don't go to church. Okay, then I'll, could potentially commit sin or heresy here and there and get called out, and my public career gets gone. Oh, I don't have a good sleep life. Oh, well, that means you won't properly operate politically. You won't show up to events. You won't be an effective communicator. You may stumble. Oh, I'm not healthy. Well, then you just look terrible, and you look like an oath, and you look sloppy, and you look like a caricature of like the lazy, unclean lefty. So sort out your private life before setting out to change your public life.
Nice. Well, I think we're coming into land soon. But yeah, it'd be nice to end a bit more softly. So tell me a little bit about whatever you're comfortable sharing, obviously, in terms of how do you live out practically your life then? So I'm guessing you'll need downtime, right? So what does downtime to you look like, and how do you live out your Christian faith? Again, as much as you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah, so obviously there's exceptions to the rule. So when I'm traveling, and this is true of everyone, you'd be lying to people to suggest that your life is consistent and you don't always fall short of the grace of God. Regularly change church or prayers, pray in the morning, regularly going to the gym now, trying to get healthier, trying to get more consistent sleep, spending 1 or 2 days a week with my fiance who doesn't live anywhere near where I live. Breaks, I don't really have like a holiday per se, literally every day is a working day, but that's just more because starting this out full time is difficult, and if you take a break, you're obviously going to lose it. But I wouldn't recommend a lot of people doing this because they'd probably go insane.
And so where do you see yourself in the next, say, 5 years then?
Preferably not dead, but that goes without saying. Married, by the grace of God, hopefully. Hopefully becoming more active in universities officially, not just outside of the entrances, actually officially invited, going to society, setting up my own chapters. I don't know really. Like if you were to ask me literally a year ago, where would you see yourself? I'd probably say keep on doing Speakers Corner videos. I would never thought to do this. So
yeah, a lot's changed for you, hasn't it, in the last couple of years, which is in your just a few years here, so 18 years so far, which is very very young, done a lot. And is there anything that people don't understand about you? I just thought it was a different question. Like, is there something which misconceptions about you that you'd like people to know?
That I'm rich, that I do this because I don't have a passion, that I'm trying to imitate in any way American figures, that, I don't know, sometimes I think people on the internet especially give criticisms that they don't think I know, which really annoys me. Like every criticism people give to me on the internet, I can take on board and I try to slowly change. But it's when people don't understand that people know that they know this. It's irritating. It's something very difficult to sort of express and measure and tell you particular things that I would like people to no longer say about me. But just know that I know everything that people are telling me on the internet and I'm trying to change.
Young Bob, thank you so much for your time today. Do you have any final thoughts, and how do people find you and support you?
Just go on Young Bob on all social medias. You'll probably find me on the internet, either causing mischief, being on the news or whatever. It's very difficult to not find me on the internet sometimes, I find, which is extremely unfortunate. However, for the people at home, God bless you all, and thank you for the beautiful platform.
Thank you.